Before we jump into the story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Life has a unique, unpredictable way of unfolding, often taking us down paths we never quite imagined. When I married Daniel 2 years ago, I thought I was simply marrying a man I loved, but in reality, I was stepping into a much larger world, one that included his 19-year-old son, Lucas. Back then, I didn't fully grasp the complexities that came with joining a family, especially one with a young adult who had already endured so much. I believed that by offering warmth, care, and a sense of stability, I could bring something positive into their lives. I especially hoped that I could fill some of the void Lucas must have felt after losing his mother at just 12 years old. Before I dive deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue sharing more of these compelling true stories. And don't forget to stick around until the end of this video, because what I'm about to share with you is a journey full of twists and turns that you won't want to miss. Let me start from the very beginning. My name is Zoe. I'm 36 years old, and I'm an interior designer by trade. I've spent much of my adult life focused on my career, rarely giving much thought to relationships, much less to the possibility of merging two lives into one. Meeting Daniel came as a surprise, yet it was a beautiful one. He was everything I had never realized I needed: charming, dependable, and with an ability to make me feel secure in a way I'd never felt before. Our connection deepened quickly, and before long, I found myself moving into his stunning home. It was a place brimming with history, filled with the echoes of his late wife and the life they had shared, a life I was now entering, whether I was ready for it or not. And then there was Lucas. At first, he seemed like just another typical teenager, quiet, withdrawn, and seemingly perpetually attached to his phone or video games. But as I spent more time around him, I started to see glimpses of something more. Beneath the teenager's exterior was a sharp intellect, a disarming smile, and a layer of emotions that he often kept buried. Initially, our relationship was awkward, as most step-parent-stepchild dynamics tend to be. He kept his distance, and I respected that. I didn't want to rush anything. But over time, through simple, everyday moments like shared meals and casual conversations, we began to bridge the gap. Sometimes, he'd join me in the kitchen while I prepared dinner, standing off to the side, but watching me with a curious eye. Other times, we'd find ourselves sitting together in the living room, both lost in our thoughts while watching TV. But there was a quiet comfort in the space we shared. Daniel, being a busy executive, was often away for work, which meant that Lucas and I had the house to ourselves more often than not. At first, it felt strange, awkward, even. I worried that I might be overstepping my bounds, that I might be trying too hard to connect, but I gradually started to realize that things didn't need to be forced. Our relationship evolved at its own pace. It became a quiet friendship, one built on mutual respect and an unspoken understanding of the boundaries we both needed. One particularly lazy Saturday afternoon, Daniel had gone out to run errands, leaving Lucas and me alone in the house. I was about to settle in for a show when I realized my bracelet had gotten caught between the cushions of the couch. Slightly frustrated, I reached between the cracks to retrieve it, but before I knew it, my hand was wedged tightly in the gap. Not again, I muttered under my breath, tugging at my hand with little success. The more I tried to free myself, the more trapped I became. I could feel the embarrassment creeping in, but there was no way around it. "I need help," I called out, trying to hide the humor in my voice. It didn't take long for Lucas to appear in the doorway, looking both confused and a little amused. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "My hand is stuck in the couch," I said, letting out a small laugh, half at my own expense. To my surprise, his face softened into a smile, and instead of making a joke about the situation, he calmly stepped forward. He knelt beside me, offering his assistance without a moment's hesitation. As he gently worked to free my hand, I couldn't help but realize how much we had grown in our quiet way. This simple, unexpected moment of him helping me in such a gentle, unassuming way spoke volumes. In that instant, I understood something important. Sometimes the small acts of kindness are the ones that build the strongest foundations. This wasn't just a hand being freed from a couch cushion. It was the start of something bigger. something that would shape the dynamic between us and help us navigate the complexities of our relationship as a family. It wasn't always easy, but moments like this made me realize how valuable the journey was, how important it was to allow time and patience to shape what would eventually become a deep, lasting bond. "Let me help," he said, his voice low and steady. His hand brushed lightly against mine as he reached for my wrist, and for a moment, everything around me seemed to blur. The touch was so gentle, so considerate, that I felt a strange flutter in my chest. It was as though every nerve in my body was suddenly awake, alive, responding to him in a way I hadn't anticipated. The warmth of his fingers against my skin sent a jolt through me, and I had to swallow hard to steady my breath. My heart was pounding, but not from any danger, more from the intensity of the moment. Lucas's fingers worked to release my hand from between the cushions, and as he did, I couldn't help but notice the way his touch lingered just a little longer than necessary. My mind struggled to focus on the task at hand when everything inside me was pulling in a different direction. The warmth spread through me like a soft, electric current, and I felt myself almost dizzy from the feeling. It was as if his touch was igniting something deep within me, something I hadn't even known was there. Once my hand was free, Lucas didn't immediately pull away. His eyes locked with mine, and in that instant, everything changed. There was a depth in his gaze I hadn't seen before, something quiet and intense, something that felt entirely different from the way he usually looked at me. Time seemed to stand still as the air between us thickened with a silent understanding, a tension that neither of us had acknowledged before. "I should probably get back to my room," Lucas said, his voice sounding strained as though he, too, was struggling to make sense of the moment. He stood up quickly, stepping back from me as though the space between us had suddenly become unbearable. But as he turned to walk away, I couldn't bring myself to let the moment slip away. "Wait," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the quiet of the room. He hesitated, then turned back to face me. His eyes were still filled with that unspoken emotion, and I felt a rush of warmth and nervousness flood my chest. I had no idea what was happening, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. "What is it?" Lucas asked, his voice softer now, almost tentative. He seemed to sense that something had shifted, and I wasn't sure I could keep pretending it hadn't. I didn't know what to say, but I couldn't hold back any longer. Slowly, I reached out, my hand trembling slightly as I touched his arm. It was a hesitant gesture, almost as though I was testing the waters, but somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. His eyes flickered down to my hand, then back into mine. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The silence between us was thick, charged with something more than simple curiosity, something far more complicated, something neither of us was sure how to name. "I've been feeling something, Lucas," I whispered, my voice unsteady as I tried to make sense of what I was experiencing. "I don't know what it is, but it's there, between us, and I can't ignore it anymore." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. There was a long pause, and for a moment, I wondered if I had said too much, if I had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. But then his gaze softened, and the intensity in his eyes didn't waver. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. The air around us seemed to hum with the weight of everything unsaid. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to fill that silence with words. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. At that moment, everything was clear. "I feel it too," he whispered, his breath warm against my lips. Before I could process his words, his lips were on mine, soft at first, tentative, unsure, as if we were both still trying to make sense of what was happening. But as our lips met, a wave of urgency swept through me, washing away my hesitation. His kiss deepened, becoming more intense and more consuming, as though we were both desperate to close the gap between us. The world around us seemed to vanish at that moment, leaving only the feeling of his lips moving against mine, igniting a fire inside me that I could no longer deny. Lucas's hand slid to my back, pulling me closer, and the heat of his body pressed against mine in a way that made everything else feel distant and irrelevant. My senses were overwhelmed. The taste of him, the warmth of his touch, the sound of our breaths mingling. It felt like we were two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. As the kiss deepened, his lips parted mine, and our tongues met in a slow, teasing dance. Every inch of my body was alive with a longing I didn't fully understand, but couldn't resist. My hand found its way to his chest, feeling the solid strength of his muscles beneath the fabric of his shirt, and I wanted to explore more, to feel every inch of him, to pull him even closer. But just as the intensity grew, I pulled back, breathless, my heart pounding in my chest. "We can't do this," I whispered, my forehead resting gently against his, trying to steady myself, trying to remind myself of the boundaries we had yet to cross. It's wrong." But even as I said the words, I felt the pull of something stronger than reason. Lucas's hands were still on my waist, his grip firm but gentle, as if he was anchoring me in the moment. "I don't care," he murmured, his voice low and filled with a raw desire that matched the heat I felt rising within me. "I need this. I need you." His words settled into my chest, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if I could ever go back to the way things were before this had happened. But the truth was I didn't want to. The next few days were a blur of stolen glances and lingering touches. Every interaction, no matter how small, seemed charged with an undeniable tension between us. I couldn't keep my distance, not when every time I saw Lucas, my heart would race, and every touch would send a shiver of heat through my body. In the kitchen, as we moved around each other, his presence was like a magnet, drawing me in, the simplest of gestures. His hand brushing against mine, his body close enough for me to feel the warmth of his skin, left me breathless. The heat inside me built, growing uncontrollably, like a fire I didn't know how to extinguish, and every time I thought I had a handle on it, he would brush past me again, and I'd feel the flames spark back to life. One afternoon, as we sat together on the couch, Lucas settled beside me closer than usual. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there, his eyes focused on the TV, but I could feel the shift in the air. The tension between us was palpable, like the crackle before a storm. The silence was thick with unspoken words, and it was almost unbearable. I couldn't keep my thoughts contained any longer. "Lucas," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "What are we doing?" He turned to face me, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place, but I knew it was the same hunger I felt. "I don't know," he admitted softly, his voice barely a whisper, "but I can't stop thinking about you." The weight of his words settled heavily in my chest, and I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell him we had to stop, that this was wrong, that it would tear everything apart. But another part of me, one I couldn't control, wanted nothing more than to let the moment unfold, to give in to what we both felt. But as our gazes locked and the space between us grew smaller, I realized that there were no easy answers. The only thing that mattered now was the raw connection we shared and the uncertainty of what would come next. Before I could even form a coherent thought, his hand slid to my thigh, his touch igniting a surge of heat that pulsed through my body. I had to fight to keep my breath steady, but it was no use. He leaned in closer, and this time I didn't pull away. The distance between us evaporated as I welcomed his kiss, feeling a wave of longing wash over me. It wasn't gentle, not like before. It was desperate, urgent, as though we were both on the edge of losing control. His lips pressed harder against mine, demanding and passionate, and I met him with equal intensity, not wanting to hold back. His hands moved, gliding up to cup my face, his thumb brushing my skin tenderly as he deepened the kiss. I felt his body against mine, the firm heat of his chest pressing into the softness of me. It was intoxicating, the contrast between the two of us. Every nerve in my body seemed to hum with electricity as I struggled to catch my breath. I wanted him more than I could put into words. There was no denying it any longer. The overwhelming need I felt for him was consuming, and I didn't want to fight it. Before I even realized it, we were in my bedroom, the room suddenly feeling small and too hot as our bodies collided in a frenzy of passion. His hands were everywhere, moving with a mix of urgency and reverence as he touched me and explored every inch of my skin like he was memorizing it. Each touch was a spark, setting my senses alight. Each kiss deeper, more fervent than the last. His lips trailed down my neck, making me gasp, my body trembling beneath his touch. I couldn't think anymore. Couldn't even focus on the world outside of this moment, on the whirlwind of sensations and emotions swirling between us. "I want you, Zoe," he whispered against my skin, his voice low and raw with need. His words were like a promise, a confession of his hunger for me. "I can't stop." In that instant, I realized I didn't want him to stop either. I was beyond caring about what was right or wrong, beyond questioning the consequences. The need I felt for him, the way his touch seemed to ignite something deep within me, was all-consuming. I wanted him just as much as he wanted me. Our bodies moved together, as though we were two halves of a whole, syncing with each other in a rhythm of raw desire. Every kiss, every touch, every movement felt like a confession. The weight of our emotions, the intensity of the moment, was too much to process, yet it felt so right in the chaos of it all. But as the night faded, so did the clarity. Things became complicated. That night, we had shared something that was deeply intimate, something that would be impossible to forget, but we both knew it couldn't be that simple. The guilt crept in slowly, insidiously. It wrapped around us like a cold, suffocating cloud, and neither of us knew how to make sense of it. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The distance between us grew in the days that followed. I couldn't look at him the same way, couldn't meet his gaze without feeling a wave of confusion and guilt. Our interactions became stiff and distant, like we were both walking on eggshells, avoiding what had happened, pretending it didn't exist. Conversations were short, surface level, and the space between us felt like an insurmountable wall. The weight of what we'd shared, what we'd done, was far too heavy for either of us to carry alone. But every time I saw him, my heart would race, and the tension would return, an electric current running through the air. It was as though nothing could erase what had happened between us, as if the touch of his hand, the intensity of his kiss, had left a permanent mark on me. Even in the most mundane moments, the weight of his presence lingered in the room, in the quiet spaces between our words. I could tell he was struggling too, the flicker of his gaze betraying the emotions he was trying to contain. We both knew we couldn't go back to how things were before. That version of us, before the kiss, before everything had changed, seemed almost like a distant dream, a life that no longer fit into the reality we now faced. I began to question everything, the decisions I'd made, the feelings that had risen within me, and what it all meant for the future. Could we truly be together? Was it even possible to build something out of the mess we had created? Was it wrong to feel this way? My mind swirled with the chaos of emotions. The last thing I wanted was to hurt Daniel, to betray him after everything we had been through. But the pull I felt toward Lucas, this undeniable connection that seemed to grow stronger with every passing day, was impossible to ignore. I felt torn, lost in the space between guilt and longing, unable to figure out what was right or what I truly wanted. One night, as we were sitting together in the living room, the silence between us thick and heavy, Lucas finally broke it. His voice, low and hesitant, cut through the tension. "Zoe, I need to talk to you." I turned to him, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the tightness in my throat, the weight of the moment sinking in. "What's going on?" I asked, though I already knew that whatever he had to say would only add to the confusion that had taken root inside me. "I can't keep pretending anymore," he said quietly, his gaze dropping to his hands. There was something raw in his words, something vulnerable that made me ache for him. "I feel something for you, Zoe. Something real, and I don't know what to do about it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, the intensity of his confession making my breath catch. I had known it, felt it, but hearing him say it out loud made it undeniable, made it so much more real. The emotions I had tried so hard to suppress, the desires I tried to ignore, rose to the surface, threatening to overwhelm me. I nodded slowly, trying to steady myself, but my heart was hammering in my chest, a rapid thudding that echoed in my ears. I feel the same way, Lucas, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. But we can't just ignore the situation. What about Daniel? What about everything we've built together? I can't just throw that all away. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but they were the truth. I couldn't ignore the life I had with Daniel. Even if the pull I felt toward Lucas was becoming stronger and more intense with every passing moment. Lucas stood up and walked over to the window, his back to me, his posture tense, as though the weight of my words was too much for him to bear. I watched him, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I know, he said, his voice low, almost defeated. I've thought about all of that, but every time I see you, I can't pretend it's not there. It's like I'm living in two worlds, Zoe. Two completely different worlds, and I can't reconcile them. He turned back to me, his eyes searching mine, a mixture of longing and pain in his expression. I can't keep pretending that what we have isn't real. I can't pretend that I don't want you, that I don't care about you. His words struck deep, reverberating through my chest. It was as though he had pulled open the door to a truth I hadn't wanted to face. But now, there was no going back. I could see the honesty in his eyes and the sincerity in his voice, and it made everything even harder to navigate. He wasn't asking for a solution, not yet. He was simply laying his heart bare, and that raw vulnerability was something I couldn't ignore. I stood up, my legs shaky as I moved toward him. My hand rested lightly on his shoulder, the contact sending a spark of warmth through me. I don't know what to do either, Lucas, I said softly, the words tasting both heavy and relieving. But I do know that whatever this is between us, we have to figure it out. I can't keep pretending it doesn't exist either. But it's so much more complicated than that. It's not just about us. It's about the people we love, the lives we've built, the choices we've made. Lucas turned to face me, his eyes locked onto mine, the tension between us palpable. He stepped closer, the air between us thick with unspoken words. I don't expect you to have the answers right now, Zoe. I don't expect you to make any decisions. But I need you to know how I feel. I can't keep pretending that this doesn't matter to me. I can't keep living in this limbo, not knowing where we stand. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what was unspoken. I wanted to say something, to tell him everything I felt, but I couldn't find the words. The truth was I was terrified of what would happen if I let myself give in to what I felt for him. Terrified of losing everything I had built with Daniel, of losing myself in the whirlwind of emotions that Lucas seemed to stir inside me. I need time, Lucas, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think, to figure this out. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to make a choice I'll regret. But I can't ignore this connection between us, either. Lucas nodded, his face softening with a mixture of relief and sadness. I'll give you all the time you need, Zoe. I'm not going anywhere. Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going to give up on what we have. I took a step back, my mind reeling with the enormity of what we were facing. Every step I took, every decision I made, felt like it would lead to something irreversible. I didn't know how to navigate this. How could I choose between the life I had with Daniel, the man I had promised myself to, and the overwhelming pull I felt toward Lucas, a man who seemed to awaken something inside me I had never known existed? Could I truly make that choice? And if I did, what would be left in the wake of it all? The night stretched on, the silence between us more comfortable, yet still laden with the weight of what we both knew. Neither of us spoke, both of us lost in our thoughts, knowing that the future was uncertain and the decisions we made would change everything. I wasn't sure where we would go from here, but I knew that whatever path we chose, nothing would ever be the same. The only certainty was that we had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The rest of it was unknown, and that terrifying uncertainty was both our prison and our freedom. As we wrap up today's journey, we've explored the deep emotional conflict of a connection that can't be ignored, and the weight of choices that affect not just our hearts, but the lives of those around us. We've seen how difficult it can be to navigate between love, loyalty, and desire, and how those crossroads force us to confront ourselves and our relationships in ways we never anticipated. So, what have you learned so far? How do you handle the tension between what you want and what's right? What insights have resonated with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please take a moment to comment below this video and share one thing you've learned that you will bring into your life moving forward. I'd love to know how you apply these lessons to your own relationships or life choices. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content that dives deep into real-life situations, emotions, and practical advice. Your support means everything to us, and it helps keep this conversation going. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.